Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaisavamstra Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paritana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamsha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Krupa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, welcome to our continued study of chapter 18. So today we'll be discussing verses 29 through 55, this middle section of this chapter 18, which we said last week. It is a summary, a review of everything that Krishna has presented in the prior 16 chapters, from chapter 3 through 17. I guess that's 15 chapters for anyone who's doing math. So we discussed last week this concept of sannyas and tyaga. Arjuna was asking, is it the same? Is it different? To renounce the fruits of one's activities, or to renounce activity itself. Is that one and the same, or is it different? And the conclusion was that Krishna was using those words interchangeably. And he concluded that it is best to renounce the fruits of one's activities, but to continue doing activities so that one can purify and make progress in the process of devotional service. And this was the summary of the whole first section of the Bhagavad Gita. Then Krishna moved on to speak about Jnana Yoga, and covering the third section of Bhagavad Gita, and how to work with no reactions. Knowing who is the real doer by understanding the 5 constituents of actions, one can learn how to work with no reactions. And so Krishna spoke about that. He also then spoke about the division of knowledge and action and worker, and how they interact, or how they behave in the 3 modes of material nature. And we understood that everything ultimately is carried out by the 3 modes. And that was the last section of the chapter 18 that we covered. And so now in 29, Krishna is going to begin an introduction to both the understanding and determination in the 3 modes. So he says, O winner of wealth, now please listen as I tell you in detail of the different kinds of understanding and determination according to the 3 modes of material nature. So Krishna now will explain these 2 features in the 3 modes, just as he has spoken previously about knowledge, action, and the worker in the 3 modes. 30. O son of Pratha, that understanding by which one knows what ought to be done, what ought not to be done, what is to be feared and what is not to be feared, what is binding and what is liberating, is in the mode of goodness. So in the mode of goodness, one knows what is right and what is wrong. But according to Shastra, according to scriptural direction, not one's own whimsical ideas of what is right or wrong. Then one who knows right from wrong can discriminate one's actions. So Prabhupada says, understanding which discriminates by intelligence is situated in a mode of goodness. So one who discriminates what to do and what not to do, and is not working just at the dictation of the mind or senses, that is one who is situated in goodness. And we see what is to be feared and what is not to be feared. One has great understanding. One in a mode of goodness also is not fearful of death, understanding the nature of the soul. As just one example. 31. O son of Pritha, that understanding which cannot distinguish between religion and irreligion, between action that should be done and action that should not be done, is in the mode of passion. So here in the mode of passion, the understanding is one is unsure of what is right or wrong, does not understand what should be done or what should not be done. That is in the mode of passion. And then finally in ignorance, that understanding which considers irreligion to be religion and religion to be irreligion, under the spell of illusion and darkness, and strives always in the wrong direction, O son of Partha, is in the mode of ignorance. So we see ignorance is worse because one is sure they are right, but actually they are completely wrong. They are in the opposite. What they believe to be religion is actually irreligion, and what they see to be religion is actually, what they think is irreligion is actually religion. So they have it completely backwards, and unfortunately, they are sure in their own mind that they are correct. Prabhupada writes in a nice example that they, man in ignorance, understand a great soul to be a common man, and accept a common man as a great soul. Some great Vaishnava Acharya is present amongst us, and they pay no attention. But then some common person who has some material accomplishment is revered and awed. So this is in the mode of ignorance. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, he finishes the purport by saying, in all activities, they simply take the wrong path. They are always wrong. This is the intelligence in the mode of ignorance. Okay. O son of Pritha, that determination which is unbreakable, which is sustained with steadfastness by yoga practice, and which thus controls the activities of the mind, life, and senses, is determination in the mode of goodness. So this determination we can also equate to intelligence. It fuels the intelligence, but this steadiness is what this determination really speaks to. So determination in goodness, it's the piece in which one is controlling the mind and senses. Then it is good determination. The determination to abstain from certain activities is determination in a mode of goodness. And it's what makes the intelligence very strong in the decisions. When one decides with good intelligence, understanding in the mode of goodness, to avoid a certain activity, it's determination in that same mode of goodness that helps one stop from falling victim to the temptations, to prevent one from doing any degraded activities. So this is the determination in the mode of goodness. And being steadfast and steady is very key. And Prabhupada writes that persons who are engaged in Krishna consciousness are never deviated by any other activity. So they become 100% occupied in activities in the mode of goodness. Of course, Srila Prabhupada is speaking on the mode of devotional service, but one is not deviated by other activities or tempted by anything else, being so satisfied in the process of devotional service. So now determination in the mode of passion, however. But that determination by which one holds fast to fruitive activities in religion, economic development, and sense gratification is of the nature of passion, O Arjuna. So this, in the mode of passion, there's also determination, but the determination is wrongly placed. Determination, passion is being extremely determined to satisfy the senses. And we see this passion and determination very prevalently in society. But there is strong desire to achieve fruitive results from dharma, artha, kama. this fruitive activities that we see in the scriptures even. So strong determination to achieve fruitive results and trying to satisfy the unlimited desires of the mind, that is determination, the mode of passion. And now in ignorance, in that determination which cannot go beyond dreaming, fearfulness, lamentation, moroseness, and illusion, such an unintelligent determination, O son of Pritha, is in the mode of darkness. So again, there's determination in ignorance. It's here, but again, misplaced. They're basically determined to be lazy, determined to sleep, to remain intoxicated. Right? So, we would, in the mode of goodness, there's determination to make spiritual progress by yoga. In the mode of passion, there's determination to make advancements in material affairs. And in ignorance, they're determined to do nothing, to be lazy. Nothing will get in the way of my sleep. I will get my 15 hours of sleep. That is a determination. So now Krishna is going to speak about happiness in the three modes and how we can understand them to be different. So in 36, Krishna says, O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the three kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distresses. So there are three kinds of material happiness, and they all ultimately lead to misery because they are on the material platform. But he says at the end here, by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. So what does that mean? Here, Krishna is referring to that one who finally gets tired of trying to find happiness in the material world, even from the mode of goodness, will come to the path of devotional service. Comes to spiritual realization through the association of great devotees, and thus one can achieve the ultimate happiness. So when one tires of chewing the chewed, as Srila Prabhupada used to say, trying to extract a few drops of happiness from the material world is like trying to extract some juice from a piece of fruit that's already been chewed. There's nothing left, but we keep trying to churn it to obtain some happiness. So, but again, Krishna gives us light at the end of the tunnel. It can all come to an end if one takes that frustration and inspires one to the path of devotional service. Okay. So 37. That which in the beginning may be just like poison, but at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. So happiness in the mode of goodness, it feels like poison at first, but ends in happiness. So this happiness is coming from the process of self-realization. It is the only happiness in the mode of goodness. Otherwise, it will all be in a misery. So, sense pleasures, enjoying the senses, it's very easy to see. But the internal peace and happiness from self-realization is harder to see at first. It's harder to experience. It takes some time, some discipline, some regulation. Somebody, getting, intoxicated at a party and dancing very nicely. It's easy to say, oh yeah, that's fun. But it's hard sometimes to imagine how, sitting around and reading Bhagavad Gita on a Friday evening could be so ecstatic. There's, kind of what we say, poison at first. But again, it's important that it appears to be poison. Because, as Prabhupada writes, one has to follow many rules and regulations to control the mind and senses and to concentrate the mind on the self. So there are some regulations, we don't do this, you cannot do this activity, and we think, oh, there's some difficulty. But of course, in the end, one experiences a great pleasure by restricting the senses to these different activities. But very important, that sadhana, that restriction, it is not poison, but it appears as such. There's a little bit of difficulty before the happiness of those activities manifest. So in the end, there is great happiness. So, getting to chant our rounds is sometimes a struggle at first. Oh, I don't know, but someone says this is going to really work. Fine, I'll give it a shot. And we see that sort of consciousness. But of course, once one starts and enjoys and experiences the taste, there's great happiness. So this is in the mode of goodness. A little bitter at first, but ends in happiness. Whereas in mode of passion, verse 38, that happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their object, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be in the nature of passion. So here, it's the opposite. Nectar at first, but ultimately misery, poison. You drink heavy intoxication at the night during the party, next day, hangover. So we see beginning, very much fun, but then great suffering. Prabhupada gives the example in the purport of unrestricted sense desires, engaging in sex relationships, may be very enjoyable at first, but it results in potentially disease, unwanted children, family struggles, and all kinds of difficulties. So, and this is the nature of any pursuit of mode of passion happiness. It's 100% ends in misery every single time. And there's a reason for it. Because the desires one is attempting to satisfy through these material affairs, they're never going to be satiated. The material desires will never be satisfied, and thus one will be left feeling angry, frustrated by the lack of satisfaction. And if they are temporarily satisfied, one will want more. There becomes greed, and thus there will be endless more desires to try to work very hard to satisfy. So, for many reasons, 100% of the time, this ends in actual poison or misery that one experiences. 39. And that happiness by which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from the beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. So happiness and ignorance, it arises from sleep. Oh, I get to sleep. But this happiness is completely blind to self-realization. And there is delusion from beginning to end, everywhere. There is no aspect of having any clarity. And unfortunately, in the ignorance, this happiness is really distress throughout, middle, beginning, and the end. At least in passion, there's some small sliver of enjoyment in the beginning before it ends in misery. But in ignorance, it is misery throughout. So this is the happiness in the three modes of material nature. And so Krishna is now going to summarize everything that he has discussed in this 40th verse, which is saying, there is no being existing either here or among the demigods in the higher planetary systems, which is free from these three modes born of material nature. So the point here is everyone is subject to the three modes within the material world until one comes, of course, to devotional service, which Krishna explained in the prior chapters, is the means to transcend the modes. So we must acknowledge that we are influenced by the modes and then find a way to transcend, to get beyond them. And so Krishna has summarized that all he has spoken thus far in chapter 18 in this verse. And so we know in the first section he spoke again about doing this renounced work without the desires for the fruits. And then he summarized the last section of the Bhagavad Gita, speaking about this jnana, about the soul and the super soul and the kshetra, and ultimately understanding how that interacts with the modes of material nature, and to understand who is the real doer, and thus one should renounce the fruits. So now, going forward in this chapter, Krishna is going to speak about the progressive steps through from karma and jnana, ultimately up until the realization of the super soul, this Paramatma realization, and then he'll conclude this Bhagavad Gita with the discussion of the ultimate instructions, which is to do devotional service, bhakti, in full Bhagavan realization. So he's going from this impersonal Brahman realization to Paramatma, ultimately to Bhagavan realization, and with the most potent final instruction, which is to abandon everything and surrender unto Krishna. So that is that inflection point in this chapter begins here in verse 41. So in these next sections of verses, Krishna is going to speak about the types of work according to the different varnas. So Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras are all distinguished by the qualities born of their own natures, in accordance with the maternal modes, O chastiser of the enemy. So we are born of a certain nature, and that nature leads to a certain type of work that is very suitable for us. So what work we should do is also going to be given here. So we see this Bhagavad Gita is also very, very practical. It gives, career advice. What is the best for each and every individual based on the different qualities. So there is no, nothing left to speculate or to guess upon. So in 42, you see peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities by which the Brahmanas work. I know a couple of weeks ago we had a question. Where does Krishna speak about the qualities of what the Brahmanas work? So here we see 9 qualities by which the Brahmanas perform different activities. Right? So this is given here. So in the end, that the Brahmanas do not do any activity in terms of producing income, creating any goods and materials. Their activity is to cultivate and teach these qualities and the nature of how to exist peacefully to all the others. And in return, the other sectors of society support the Brahmanas for their very wonderful contribution. So the Brahmanas are meant to teach and to guide, and they are supported by the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Shudras in all of their needs. So this is the work and the position of the Brahmanas. Now the Kshatriyas in 43, heroism, power, determination, resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, and leadership are the natural qualities of work for the Kshatriyas. So the Kshatriya has these important qualities. And ultimately, they need the power to be able to control society, to control others. Again, not controlling for one's own selfish desires as an abuse of power, but to create a very peaceful society in which everyone can coexist very nicely. So a key characteristic here, while we talk about heroism, power, resourcefulness, courage, we also see generosity. That the Kshatriya must be very generous and very kind and loving, though ferocious at times, even up to the point of needing to kill, but has a very generous nature and disposition. So this is the qualities by which the Kshatriyas perform work. And now the Vaishyas and Shudras. Farming, cow protection, and business are the natural work for the Vaishyas. And for the Shudras, there are labor and service to others. So the Vaishyas, 3 main activities. Farming, agricultural work, cow protection, and business or finance, banking. And so they are producing all the different things within society. And this is the work of the Vaishyas. And then we have the Shudras, who serve, who have a nice capacity to serve the other 3 varnas, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. And so in this way, all 4 work together very cooperatively to create a wonderful environment for which the ultimate purpose of life can be fulfilled, and that is spiritual realization. And so this is how the 4 varnas have different qualities which then define the work that they will do. So now Krishna will speak about how to become perfect if they follow their qualities and work accordingly. So Krishna says, by following his qualities of work, every man can become perfect. Now please hear from me how this can be done. So Krishna says, you can become perfect by following your qualities and doing work. And he's going to explain exactly how that can happen in the coming verses. Very important, because we'll want to know how. And so Krishna is going to answer. In 46, he says, by worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings, and who is all-pervading. A man can attain perfection through performing his own work. So perfection through doing one's own work. This is how it happens, right? But the question, the key, and Prabhupada says in the purport, is that one ultimately must understand to work for Krishna. When we work for Krishna, then everything becomes perfect. We do our work, but we offer the results to the Supreme Lord. Then our work becomes actual sacrifice, even though we may be situated within the three modes. And so we know work must be done as a sacrifice, as Krishna said all the way back in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So perfect work occurs when one does work for Krishna. So living a simple life and doing the duty in perfection, thinking that Krishna has engaged me in some activity, and this activity will help me progress in devotional service, and thinking, let him be pleased with whatever work I may be able to offer. And if we work in this mood, our activities become perfect. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, quoting the 7th verse from the 12th chapter, the Supreme Lord takes charge of delivering such a devotee. So the reciprocation is that Krishna will take care of us, will provide and guide us on the path of perfection when we begin to work in this mood of wanting to serve Krishna. So the result of working for Krishna is perfection. The detached work leads to purification of the mind and senses, and one achieves full knowledge of everything. So this is how one can work perfectly. And we sometimes see so many imperfections in our work, and that leads to the next couple verses that Krishna will speak. In 47, he says, "It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform it imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly. Duties prescribed according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reactions." So we saw this topic back in the earlier section of the Bhagavad Gita. So again, this is a review. But why one should do their own work, even if imperfectly? Because trying to do another's work won't lead to peace. It's not our nature. We have a certain nature that leads us to a type of work. A Brahmana cannot do Vaishya work, or a Shudra cannot do the Kshatriya's work. It just is not the nature. So one should do their own work, even if it is imperfect, since all material work has still some imperfections anyways. But again, as we saw in the prior verse, if one does it as an offering to Krishna, then whatever imperfections may be there automatically become cleansed, become perfect. And so, the imperfections we understand, like a Kshatriya, sometimes has to lie, or even has to kill, violence. That is the nature. But a Brahmana cannot try to perform that type of work. It will become very disturbing to the Brahmana to have to, try to, potentially needing to kill an aggressor who is becoming, who's causing disaster. Of course, a Kshatriya does such actions according to Shastra, according to the Manu Samhita. But a Brahmana who tries to do that will become extremely disturbed, whereas a Kshatriya will be able to perform that activity even though it appears to be imperfect. Right? So it's important. And also, one should not just give up work because there is some defect or some difficulties. Prabhupada talks about the Vaishya sometimes having to lie in their business. Oh, I'm making no profit in this sale. Of course, that is something that, it must be done in order to create a reasonable livelihood. And so, one should not just give it up. Oh, I don't want to do that type of thing. No, that is the quality we have acquired, and so one should do it. So, ultimately, we should understand that working according to His way, then all work is good. There's nothing abominable. If done knowing that everything all the work we're doing interacting with Krishna's energy, seeing His presence everywhere, and thus then begin to work for the real doer, the Supreme Lord. Then all the work that we do is good. So we cannot abandon our work just because we don't want to, perform, maybe some, violent activity or killing. But again, or not again, but we have to be also careful that this is a fine line here. One cannot rationalize, oh, I have to lie as a Vaishya, so now I'll become a liar. No, that is very destructive. So one should understand that one cannot rationalize their violence or some of the activities that that appear within these varnas to perform one's own sense gratification. So one must be very disciplined. So again, overall, working according to the modes and the nature we have, but working for Krishna leads to perfection. As long as we do that, there will be no bondage. But once we work for our own senses, even as a Brahmana, there will be bondage and results that will lead ultimately to suffering. So to be free from all of that, it doesn't matter where we are, in any varna, in Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, or Brahmana. If we work for Krishna, it is perfect and results in perfection. But if we don't, regardless of where we are, it will lead to bondage and future suffering. Okay? So anywhere we may be, one can advance in Krishna consciousness. So Krishna will continue his talk about the imperfections. Every endeavor is covered by some fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore one should not give up the work born of his nature, O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of fault. So no one is perfect in the work, and no work is perfect in the material world. Only in the spiritual world are all activities perfect. So sometimes we may have to, again, do things that we don't want to do, but they should not be rejected. One should overcome those obstacles. The Vaishya having to lie, saying, "Oh, I'm giving you a very special deal." That's part of the business. Sometimes you have to interact with folks and go to business dinners and different situations that one doesn't necessarily want to do, but that is a function of one's varna and should thus do it. A Kshatriya having to do violence. Sometimes a Shudra has to serve a bad boss or master, and so these things are there. But again, if one with intelligence knows that one can cleanse away all of these impurities of work by working for Krishna, as he explained a couple of verses prior. If we work for the Supreme Lord, then everything becomes perfect, even though there is some, again, imperfections that we see in the work that we are doing. And so to think to do another Varna's work is not going to solve the problems. Because in each Varna, there is some imperfection, some impurities of work. So we have to, Krishna is saying, stick within your Varna. It will lead to the best outcome for you, but work for Krishna. And again, we have to be very careful not to try to rationalize our misbehavior by saying, oh yeah, each Varna has to do some things that aren't so perfect, aren't so nice. No, that is not the indication here. It is not a license to do nonsense. Again, being guided by the work for Krishna, one will be sure to be pure in their efforts, even though one may have to commit, maybe some violence or some lies or as such. Krishna uses this example of the smoke and fire, right? So fire is always pure. It is a pure element, one of the 5 foundational gross elements. But sometimes there is smoke that comes, right? So one doesn't, throw away the fire because there's some smoke. One still utilizes the function of fire, the heat and light, despite the presence of some smoke. So similarly, one still does their duties because the duties are pure, even though there are some perceived imperfections. And so one tolerates the smoke and the fire. One should tolerate the difficulties or the imperfections of the work and just do it. So no, you cannot just quit your job because I have to shake hands with a filthy karmi. Nope, that is part of your varna. You must do so. But again, working for Krishna, it makes everything perfect. So this is the key, is to worship Krishna through one's work. Then one will be fully purified. Detachment and devotion and working will remove all the imperfections. not just renouncing work itself. We can't just say, I'm not going to do work. No, one must have intelligence on how to purify the work, and that is by working for Krishna, and thus one becomes perfect. So now, starting in the 49th verse, we're going to see a transition in the chapter. So, or in the rest of the chapters, and how Krishna is presenting knowledge. So, just a kind of summary of how these verses are going to unfold. So, from the next 6 verses, next 7 verses, Krishna is going to speak on this Jnana Yoga up to Bhakti, up to Brahma Bhuta, this self-realization, which is Brahman realization to its fullest. Then Krishna will transition to working in pure devotional service from verses 56 to 63. And this is this Paramatma realization, and ultimately coming to the topic of verses 64 through 66, which is the most confidential, to become the pure devotee of Krishna, this Bhagavan realization. And then Krishna will give some post discussion after concluding with talking about the glories of preaching and studying this knowledge within the Bhagavad Gita. Then Arjuna will respond and very famously speak, Krishya Vachanam Tava, that I am prepared now to follow. And then the chapter will conclude with Sanjaya's prediction of what is going to happen and his realizations. Again, remember, this conversation is happening at the beginning of the battle. And so Sanjaya, having observed this conversation and relaying it to Dhritarashtra, will give his summation. So this is how the remainder of the chapter will unfold. We'll cover just the next few verses up to 55 today, and the remainder of the chapter we'll cover next week. So in verse 49, Krishna says, one who is self-controlled and unattached, who disregards all material enjoyments, can obtain by practice of renunciation the highest perfect stage of freedom from reaction. So, working intelligently, without desire for fruits, one achieves freedom from reaction. So, fully detached from the fruits. We've seen this before. Importantly, Prabhupada guides us in the purport that one who is in Krishna consciousness automatically has freedom from reaction, is automatically a sannyasi, because they've detached from the fruits and they're only working for Krishna. So there is no reaction in the work of a devotee. This is the real renunciation. Again, not just being in the sannyas order of life, but working for Krishna. So, yes, the self-controlled who are unattached, they also become free from reactions, but the bhakta, the devotee, is by nature of their activities also fully purified. So again, Prabhupada in all these purports is speaking about devotional service, though we are still, Krishna is speaking still on the platform of this Jnana Yoga. Okay? So, in verse 50, Krishna continues, O son of Kunti, learn from me how one who has achieved this perfection can attain the supreme perfectional stage, Brahman, the stage of highest knowledge, by acting in the way I shall summarize now. So, the point here is, now having coming to the perfection point of being free from reaction, right? To be able to do work in the material world without reactions is coming to perfection. And from there, one can achieve the supreme perfectional stage. So again, coming up to even a higher realization. And this is realizing Brahman, the highest state of knowledge. So just knowing I am not matter, I am spirit soul, is not complete because one has not yet understood the Supreme Lord. So that is the highest or the supreme perfectional stage. So Krishna is now going to speak about how one can come to that platform, right? So in the purport, Prabhupada writes, the Lord described for Arjuna how one can achieve the highest perfectional stage simply by engaging in his occupational duty, performing that duty for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these next verses, we'll discuss that. So the verses 49 and 50, again, they're referring to the Jnana Yogis who have purified their consciousness through detached work. They understand they are not matter, and they have moved from Karma Yoga to Jnana Yoga. but they have not yet come to Bhagavan realization. And so Krishna will speak about how to come to this perfectional stage of Brahman realization and ultimately to Bhagavan realization. So Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur comments on verse 49 that this is the first level of sannyas work, which again is doing detached activity. And that thus purifies the mind, and then one can come to the second stage of sannyas, which is to actually give up activities, but only after one is fully purified. Right? So this Brahman realization that is achieved by the jnanis, we should know that it is different than the Brahman realization of the devotees. The jnanis give up work realizing Brahman after purifying from detached work, but the devotees, they go from detached work straight to devotional service, working for Krishna as Bhagavan. So this is the jnanis are going through the step-by-step process. Remember, Brahman refers to both the impersonal and the personal feature of the Lord. So it is not on the same platform. And this is the step-by-step process. Again, all of this Krishna is going to tell us in the end. Sarva dharmam parityaj. You abandon all different varieties and just do devotional service. This is the direct and highest of all the stages, but that is still coming, and Krishna is making his way towards that. So how does a jnani elevate further on this sequential step-by-step process? That is described in the next verse, because again, we must keep going forward. The jnani knowing matter is one thing, but one must fully understand spirit to have complete knowledge. And so Krishna is now going to explain how one continues to progress. Being purified by his intelligence and controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, being freed from attachment and hatred, one who lives in a secluded place and eats little, who controls his body, mind, and power of speech, who is always in trance and who is detached, free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, free from false proprietorship, and peaceful. Such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. So these are 10 processes to attain Brahman realization. And we'll see this topic called Brahmabhuta in the next verse. This Brahmabhuta is one who has no attachment for material things. And this is hard to achieve in the jnana process because it takes long meditation, intense endeavor, living in a secluded place. It is very arduous. But the same position we know can be achieved by devotional service. One who's in bhakti is automatically detached from all material affairs because they are enjoying all the bliss of spiritual life. So one can detach from material affairs by attaching to Krishna. That is the easier, direct process. But this process described here in these verses is speaking for the jnana yogis. But unfortunately, they do not achieve the benefit of the natural detachment that happens through the higher taste of devotional service. So this process is being described here. And important, again, the level of Brahmabhuta at this stage is the stage of self-realization of Brahman in the impersonal feature, not yet the full Bhagavan realization. So one is fully detached from matter and free from false ego, and all the material modes of contamination are now finished at this stage, because one is fully detached from matter, realizing that they are spirit, but not yet realizing their connection with the Supreme Spirit. So it is a very advanced stage, but not, again, most perfect yet. So this is, now Krishna will explain in the 54th verse, this link. One who is transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. So this verse in the purport requires a little bit of explanation. So again, the result of this Brahmabhuta means, again, self-realization, understanding that I am not matter. So, but this state is at the jnani platform, not yet pure devotional service. How do we know? Because Krishna says at the end, in that state, he attains pure devotional service. It means from here, he then will go to the next stage of pure devotional service. So these symptoms that we see, they are present also in the jnani. No lamentation, no distress, because one is not trying to pursue any material desires. Now, Srila Prabhupada in his purport is characterizing very beautifully for us the nature of the devotee, the bhakta, who is experiencing complete satisfaction and no hankering in devotional service. But just to make sure that we understand, in this verse, Krishna is speaking about the jnani platform. Okay, so again, the self-realization, this Brahmabhuta platform for the jnanis will then bring them to bhakti. That's why Krishna says, Mad bhaktim labate param, that one will come to the highest platform of pure devotional service. That's what he attains, having achieved now this platform. So now following Srila Prabhupada's purport, why is one who is in this Brahmabhuta stage and more directly in devotional service fully happy? They're fully joyful, Krishna says, prasannatma. Because one realizes that anything on the material platform is only a function of the body and not the spirit soul. And one in the Brahmabhuta platform is no longer identifying with the body. They have realization that I am spirit soul. They're not hanker for anything. Additional phones, a bigger house, more cars, more wealth. It's all in the bodily platform. And so there is no more hankering. There's no more lamentation, wishing I had this, wishing I had that. Right? And Prabhupada writes in the purport that since God is full in a living entity who is engaged in God's service, Krishna consciousness becomes also full in himself. So the complete satisfaction that we look for, it is achieved when one serves the complete whole. That is the only time one will find complete happiness. And Krishna is the only complete whole. So one finds full satisfaction, no more lamentation, no more hankering, as soon as one comes to the platform of pure devotional service. And then samasarveshu bhuteshu, one is a friend to everyone. Right? This happens because the one in realization, self-realization, knows that everyone is part and parcel of Krishna. He does not see the body, the differences in body. He sees the commonality of spirit soul amongst all. And thus one becomes very friendly to all. So we know that this is only possible in self-realization. If you engage in material activities, there will always be misery, always hankering, always lamentation. Right? But if one is self-realized, this Brahmabhuta stage, then one will do devotional service, knowing I'm part and parcel of Krishna, and thus will be 100% blissful life, prasannatma. Because Krishna is full and complete, his servants are also full and complete in their satisfaction. There will be nothing left that is not fulfilled. I spoke already about this attainment of pure devotional service. This is speaking about how the jnani goes from this platform of jnani yoga to ultimately pure devotional service. Having realized I am not matter, one will further inquire, well then, what is my connection as spirit to the Supreme? Okay? So, if the jnani yogi wants to become one with Brahman, then they actually stop here. If one has this impersonal desire to be in the Brahma Jyotir, then they'll stop their progress here. But if one wants to continue, and if he wants to shift his desire from becoming Brahman to serving Brahman, then he'll attain pure devotional service. So the change occurs on one's own desires and through the benefit of association. And we see this in Srimad Bhagavatam. The four Kumaras had a impersonal inclination until they came in association with the pure devotees and the Lord himself, and thus their desire elevated to pure devotional service. Shukadev Goswami was another great example in Srimad Bhagavatam. So we see how the impersonal inclination can progress further to pure devotional service, and that change occurs, as Srila Prabhupada writes, by the mercy of the Lord in association with the pure devotees. So this Brahma Bhuta stage, knowing that I am not matter and I am spirit soul, for some it is the end, and for the devotees, they continue to pure devotional service. The important point here, though, is that one who goes through devotional service directly, they're already at this Brahma Bhuta stage. Because by attaching to Krishna, one is already detached from matter. So this Brahma Bhuta stage that is achieved through this verses 51 through 53, it is automatically achieved by the devotee. So again, as Krishna said at the end of 8th chapter, nothing is lost in devotional service. It includes everything of all the prior stages, but it also gives one additional benefit. So that is important to remember. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that, for the devotee, he says, the world is miserable for the materially infected person. But for a devotee, the entire world is good as Vaikuntha, or the spiritual sky. That's a very amazing statement. We talk about the miseries of the material world. But here we remember that for a devotee, even the material world is as good as a spiritual sky. Because one has an opportunity to see and observe Krishna everywhere and ultimately render devotional service. So for the devotee, there are no dangers in the material world. All the allurements are of no consequence. He sees an opportunity to serve Krishna. He doesn't see higher or lower. It's all irrelevant. Prabhupada writes about the senses. They're like toothless serpents. There's no danger in the senses even for the devotee, because there will be no temptation to transgress the path of devotional service. This is the very wonderful platform that is achieved through pure devotional service. So now Krishna writes in the 55th verse, what is the result of this bhakti that one attains from the Brahma Bhuta stage? Krishna says, one can understand me as I am, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service. When one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. So in the last verse, Krishna said, he can attain pure devotional service, having come to this Brahma Bhuta stage. And what is the result of that? One can understand Krishna, Bhagavan realization. And by that, one can enter into the kingdom of God. So Krishna has now given the conclusion or the result of that activity of that Brahma Bhuta stage. So it's important that one can only come to Bhagavan realization by devotional service. Only way to do it. And by that is the only way one can enter into the kingdom of Krishna. One can get as far as the Brahma Jyotir in the spiritual sky, but one cannot enter into the Vaikuntha planets or Goloka Vrindavan until one comes to pure devotional service. So the Jnani can come to know Krishna only by bhakti. So of course the devotees who goes directly there, starts there, the culmination, the perfection of the Jnani process is devotional service. So either way, one must ultimately come to devotional service to know Krishna and to enter into the spiritual kingdom. So this is Bhagavan realization, the only way through bhakti. No amount of scholarship, no fancy degree, or any kind of intense yogic process can bring about that until it comes to devotional service. So knowing about Krishna's transcendental qualities and opulences thus fixes one in devotional service. And of course we must know about him. We must have some knowledge about Krishna. When we know about Krishna's wonderful position, his sweet characteristics, his wonderful qualities, one becomes attached. So thus Krishna says here that one in full consciousness of me by such devotion. So by doing bhakti, one begins to learn about Krishna. And this word vishate, Prabhupada writes in the purport, some misinterpret that to think one enters into God. No, this is entering into the kingdom of God, not entering into God. That is quite foolish to suggest, and Prabhupada writes about the green bird entering into the green tree. One does not become the tree. So similarly, the spirit soul enters into the spiritual world and there maintains its individuality and engages in loving devotional service to Krishna. And just as Krishna said in the beginning of the second chapter, never there's a time that I did not exist, nor you, never shall either of us cease to be. So one continues their individual existence even in the spiritual world. So this is Nishite. And so Prabhupada in the last paragraph talks about this devotional service begins by hearing about the Lord. So when we hear about the Lord, our material contamination, the lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, illusion dissipates, and one becomes more attached to Krishna. One becomes fully free of matter and engages in loving devotional service. So this bhakti, it is the eternal occupation. The jnanic processes that we heard earlier, those are purificatory processes. Even doing detached work, that is all purificatory. But once one is purified, one performs devotional service, and that is the eternal occupation. So in the spiritual world, where one is fully purified, one no longer does any of the purificatory processes. But what does one continue to do? Bhakti. So bhakti is both the means and the end. It is the process to purify, and it is an activity that one does when fully purified. Various mantras that lead to purification are no longer chanted in the spiritual world, but the Maha Mantra, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, continues even in the spiritual world, because that is a process of devotional service. So this is the eternal occupation that one can begin in the material conditioned life, even while one is subjected to the three modes, despite wherever one's varna may be, whatever one's qualification or lack of qualification may be, one can engage in this eternal occupation and thus achieve the results of perfect work, perfect bliss, no reactions, all the things that Krishna has spoken in this section. And that is why he will now, from this point, verse 56 forward, speak about the perfectional stage of devotional service. So he's brought us from the karma yoga, the jnana yoga, and now he's going to take us to the perfectional stage in the next 11 verses before concluding the Bhagavad Gita in this last section of chapter 18. So that we'll discuss next week. Look forward to doing that with all of you. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Hare Krishna. So any questions or comments? I know we covered a lot of verses and maybe a little bit, technical and different aspects, but any comments or questions that we have for today?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandapana.
Hare Krishna Vijay.
Very nice class to begin with. No real question, Prabhu, but I feel we are very far from the reality. So Varnashama Dharma is gone, all system is gone. The only thing remaining is just a devotion service. Do that.
Yes, that is the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Though it seems so difficult, he gave us the simple process. He established his books, his temples, his devotees. Just associate, chant your rounds, do some service, and everything. All this difficulty can be achieved perfectly. So we're very fortunate. Now we have to take advantage of that fortune and not be casual about it. Thank you, Bertie. Any other questions or comments? You have a question? Yes? Online?
Yes. Adina would like to ask, Haribol Prabhu, if we have to live and work outside the temple, how do we carry out that work for Krishna? Thank you, from the UK.
Very nice question. Thank you. So how can one carry out the work if they are working outside the temple? How can that work be for Krishna? How can that become perfect work? And so, Prabhupada writes in the purport that we discussed last week that that one who works in the factory or in the office or wherever one may work, meaning outside the temple, but is able to renounce the fruits of that work for Krishna's service, is the real sannyasi. So it doesn't mean that one who is full time in the temple is necessarily the only sannyasi, but the one who is also working out in the material world, if the fruits of that work is used in the service of Krishna. So what does that mean? How do we do that practically? Well, when we work in the material world, we get some income, we get some money, and the question is, what do we do with that income? If we are using that money to try to satisfy our sense desires, then it will not be work for Krishna. But if we are using that money, that means, to serve Krishna, then it becomes devotional service. No different than serving full-time in the temple. No different. We may perceive a difference, but it is not. So the key is, what do we do with the fruits of that work? So, yes, when I make some income, I have to maintain myself. I have to feed the body. I have to, have a home. So am I, cooking in my home for Krishna and then honoring prasadam? Am I maintaining my home to be a temple? Am I using the excess funds, to support printing Srila Prabhupada's books, supporting construction of temples? So when we say that the fruits are given to Krishna, it doesn't mean that we take the whole paycheck and we drop it in the hundi box, because that also isn't practical. That we have to have some maintenance of ourselves, but we maintain ourselves to some basic standard that's required. But even in doing so, we maintain our home as a temple. We honor foods that are offered to Krishna. We spend some income on our family. We are working together in progress of devotional service. So thus, all of that work in the office or wherever it may be also becomes devotional service. So that is how we do it, and it is very practical, and Srila Prabhupada gave us many examples of that. So hope that helps. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions for today? Okay, so if not, next week we will begin from verse 56 and conclude this most glorious Bhagavad Gita in the final section of this chapter. I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki. Hare Krishna.